Welcome back to this series on David Ricardo's theory of value. In previous episodes, we discussed the core of Ricardo's labor-embodied theory of value. In this episode, we're going to discuss what might be called Ricardian durability effects. Having made the case that natural prices will be proportional to the labor embodied in their production, Ricardo considers a phenomenon which may cause what might be called price-value deviations. Deviations of commodities' natural prices from proportionality to the relative quantities of labor embodied in them. The phenomenon in question is the difference in the durability of capital between sectors. Ricardo argues that industries which employ more durable capital, which he calls fixed capital, and those which employ less durable capital, which he calls circulating capital, can produce commodities whose natural prices deviate from proportionality to labor embodied. The ratio of fixed capital to circulating capital is often termed its capital intensity, with firms holding higher capital intensities having more durable inputs. Ricardo explains the impact of different capital intensities on price by using the money stock that pays wages as an example of circulating capital. We're going to reconstruct Ricardo's example here. From here on out, I'm going to be using some visual aids in the form of tables. I would recommend, if you can manage it, to look at the video version of this episode. If you can't, no worries, you should be able to get the idea without the tables, but they will definitely help. Imagine two sectors in an economy. They're in the business of producing two different goods. Let's say that one is an agricultural sector producing wheat, and the other is an industrial sector producing iron. In one period of production, the agricultural sector spends $100 on the wages of workers cultivating the fields. The industrial sector also spends $100 per production period, but it does so in a different manner. Before the first period, it buys $100 worth of machines that must be replaced after two production periods. Since the machine depreciates over two periods, it imbues industrial commodities with half its value per period, that is, $50. The industrial sector also employs $50 worth of labor per period. At the end of each year, the output of both sectors will be of the same value. The agricultural sector will have spent $100 in the form of wages, and the industrial sector will have spent $100 split between wages and depreciated machinery. At a profit rate of 20%, the equilibrium price of produce in both sectors will be $120. Now, imagine that wages were to rise 10% after the first period. In the agricultural sector, this would mean a wage increase and a profit decrease of $10. In the industrial sector, this would mean a wage increase and a profit decrease of $5. The equalization of profit rates makes the new profit rate become 9.1% in both sectors. The equilibrium price of agricultural goods remains $120, delivering a profit of $10. On the other hand, the equilibrium price of industrial goods has fallen to $114.50, delivering a profit of only $9.50. The same amount of labor employed in the production of these sectors is exactly the same. Even the wage per worker is the same. Yet a fluctuation in wages has caused the relative prices of agricultural and industrial goods to change. It's for this reason that Ricardo insists that the natural prices of goods produced with different capital intensity can deviate from labor embodied in the event of changes in the wage share. As an aside, without getting into too much detail, I want to note that in this model, you can treat acquired skills the same way you treat durable capital. Having given a version of the example that we just discussed, Ricardo remarks that the same reason why the natural prices of commodities produced with different capital intensities can be expected to deviate from proportionality to labor embodied in them, that is, variability in the durability of inputs, also causes commodities with different turnover speeds to deviate from labor proportionality. Since their inputs are of an overall lesser durability, production processes with quicker turnover will have natural prices that deviate from values in the same way as those with lower ratios of fixed to circulating capital. For this reason, a higher proportion of fixed capital has the same effect on prices as a slower turnover and vice versa. We can speak of price-value deviations due to differences in capital intensity as belonging to a more general class of Ricardian durability effects, of which differences in turnover time can also be a cause. The potential for durability effects may strike readers as evidence against Ricardo's labor-embodied theory, but Ricardo didn't think so. He argued that durability effects would be a modification to the general rule and a minuscule one at that. Notice that in our example, the price difference between commodities produced with different capital intensities is relatively small. A large change in the wage and profit shares, more than 10%, has resulted in a price change of only 4.6%. Ricardo believes this to be the case generally. He writes that, quote, "The greatest effects which could be produced on the relative prices of these goods from a rise in wages, or any other change in the price of circulating capitals, could not exceed 6 or 7%. The 7% augmentation which Ricardo believed durability effects would make to his labor-embodied theory led an economist named George Stigler in 1958 to suggest that Ricardo only held a 93% theory of value. Although one can certainly follow Stigler in deeming these price-value deviations as a compromise, there's a certain sense in which they're not. Here's a quote from Maurice Daub. On the contrary to regarding this as a concession, Ricardo regarded durability effects as a discovery of his own that represented a reinforcement of his argument against Adam Smith, and as such, he triumphantly announced in his Principles in 1817. Not only did the rise of wages fail to raise the price of commodities, but it actually caused the prices of some commodities to fall. Here's what Daub is highlighting. Because Ricardo's theory predicts that price-value deviations will be biased in exactly the opposite direction as an adding-up theory would predict, it's arguably just as much a modification of innovation than that of allowance. During the final weeks of his life, Ricardo drafted this paper called Absolute Value and Exchangeable Value. In it, he discussed his search for a commodity whose natural price would serve as an invariant measure of value. The reality of price-value deviations due to durability effects made this quest seem impossible. Not only would the labor embodied in the production of this commodity have to remain constant, its capital intensity and turnover speed would have to remain the same over time. Even durability effects on other commodities, let alone this commodity, which is to serve as an invariant measure of all others, would have to remain the same. This particular matter becomes even more troublesome when one begins to consider the possible effects of distribution on output. An economist named Pyrrhus Sraffa later argued that what troubled Ricardo about finding an invariant measure of value was that the size of the national product appears to change when the division of it between classes changes. The closest one can come to finding an invariant measure of value is to postulate the existence of a commodity whose capital intensity is always the socially average amount. This commodity's natural price would always be proportionate to the labor embodied in its production. Although Ricardo himself did not come up with the procedure to uncover such a commodity, this task was undertaken by his followers in years to come. In the next episode, we're going to discuss Ricardo's theory of rent and how he integrates the fact of differential rents into his theory of value. If you're a graduate student or a professor studying economics, particularly history of economic thought, and you have some interesting work you'd be willing to share with me, I'd like to speak with you. Please reach out to me by filling out the form linked in the description of this episode. If you're studying economics at the undergraduate or high school level and you're in need of a tutor, I may be able to help you. You can get in contact with me by filling out that same form. If you'd like to see more content like this, where I discuss various topics in the history of economic thought, please consider checking out my YouTube channel. See you in the next episode.